The president of the HOA rolled up to my ranch one morning, behind her. She waved some fake emergency order in my face and acted like she had the authority to make me tear down my family's century-old barn within 24 hours. She even insulted my grandfather, the man who built half of what we have, right to my face. Then she sent her little crew to sneak onto my property, and when that didn't scare me, she cut my fence in the middle of the night. Because of her stunt, my horses wandered onto the highway and were nearly crushed by a semi. She thought I was just some clueless ranch guy who'd give up, step aside, and let her flatten 4 generations of family history just so she could stretch her bland little subdivision a bit farther. What she didn't know was that I wasn't just a rancher. I'm also a civil engineer, and I had just found out that her entire kingdom sat on land she didn't even legally own. I was already planning my move, buy the ground right out from under her, crank her rent up 10 times higher, and then watch her stand in front of her own community, reading a list of the crimes she'd committed while 500 angry neighbors demanded she step down. But I'm getting ahead of the story. Let me take it from the top. My name is Damian Wright, and the first thing you should know about me is this. I trust the dirt more than I trust people. Dirt doesn't pretend. It tells you when it's thirsty, when it's worn out, when something unfamiliar has stepped across it. People, though? They lie like it's second nature. They'll look you straight in the eye and smile, all while plotting how to take whatever you've got. My grandfather taught me that right here on this land and the Wright Ranch. 160 acres of stubborn, Blackwood County ground that stayed in my family for 4 generations. He used to say, Damien, a man's character is like a fence post. In a storm, it either stays solid, or it rots inside and tips over the moment a stray mutt leans on it. I've spent my whole life trying to be the kind that doesn't fall. I went off to college, earned a civil engineering degree, learned how to build things that stay standing. But no matter where I went, I always came back home. This ranch, with its aging barn and dusty fields, feels more connected to me than my own heartbeat. That's why when Karen Lewin's spotless white SUV rolled up to my gate, kicking up a cloud of arrogance, I already knew this wasn't a friendly visit. Karen Lewin, president of the Blackwood Creek Estates HOA, a polished title for the endless beige subdivision that sprang up beside my ranch about 10 years ago, spreading like a patch of stubborn fungus that just keeps spreading. Karen stepped out of her shiny white SUV, looking like she was on her way to a fancy garden event. Her clothes were spotless, and her smile was so stiff it looked like it was holding her face together. Beside her stood a man in a cheap, wrinkled suit with a county badge hanging from his neck. He looked like he hated every second of being there. His name was Peters, and even his tie was crooked. I leaned on my fence and didn't bother opening the gate. My hands were still oily from fixing the old tractor, and I deliberately wiped them on my already dirty jeans. Then I adjusted my grandfather's old cowboy hat, a beat-up brown Stetson he wore every single day, and waited for whatever trouble she'd brought with her. Damien, Karen said, her voice fake sweet, like someone pouring honey over something rotten. So nice to see you. We just have a small bit of official business today. She motioned toward the uncomfortable man next to her. This is Mr. Peters from the county planning office. I nodded at him. He flinched like I'd shouted. Ma'am, sir, I said calmly. What can I do for you? Yes, well, Karen chirped, pulling a thick envelope from a fancy leather folder. This is about the structure. She waved her hand toward the barn like it was something she wished she didn't have to look at. My barn, the one my great-grandfather built with his own hands, using wood he cut from these very woods. The place where my grandpa showed me how to fix a saddle and how to read the weather just by watching the clouds. Sure, the paint was faded and it leaned a little to the north. It had leaned like that for 50 years. But it was solid oak and pure determination, the same as the men who raised it. To me, it was almost sacred. To her, it was ugly. The barn? I repeated, feeling my jaw tighten. It's been standing for 102 years. It's not falling anytime soon. That's exactly the issue, Damien, she said, stretching her smile until it looked dangerous. It is coming down. She said the word emergency like she'd just learned it. Mr. Peters carried out an emergency inspection this morning, she said. And he found your entire property to be a serious public hazard. The barn, the fences, the sheds, everything, unstable, unsafe, a danger to the community. A cold shiver ran down my back. My whole property? I asked. I'm afraid so, Karen replied, her eyes bright with the victory she thought she'd won. The county has declared your structures an immediate threat. She lifted her chin. We're not just talking about the barn anymore, Damien. We're talking about everything, she finished. I looked over at Peters. The man was sweating bullets, staring at the dirt near my boots like he wished he could sink into it. An emergency inspection, right? He must have done it from the road with a pair of binoculars. That's the only way he could have examined anything. I'm a civil engineer. I know when a building is solid. And I definitely know when someone is feeding me garbage. This was pure garbage. A threat to what community? I asked, motioning at the wide, empty fields around us. The gophers? Did the deer lodge a complaint? Karen's smile stayed glued on, but her eyes turned sharp and cold. That was the real Karen and the one behind the polite act. A threat to the appearance and safety of Blackwood Creek Estates, she said smoothly. The bylaws are very clear. Anything a county official labels unsafe must be taken care of. She paused for effect, enjoying every second. And Damien, she added, almost sounding pleased, a little warning for you. You might want to start packing up that farmhouse. Once the demolition crews finish here, you won't have much left to stay in. She pulled a single sheet of paper from the envelope and held it out. I didn't reach for it. Peters stepped forward, looking miserable, and clipped the notice to my fence. It looked completely official, covered in seals, stamps, and big red markings. The words emergency abatement order jumped off the page. The notice said I had 24 hours to start tearing down every structure on my land. 24 hours. If I didn't? The HOA, using some special county rule she had apparently pushed through herself, could bring in a demolition crew and do it without my permission. Then slap a lien on my property big enough to ruin me. It was basically a declaration of war written on county paper. You can't be serious, I said as my temper started to rise. You think you can just show up and tell me to tear down 4 generations of my family's work? Because it doesn't match your beige houses? It's not me, Damien. It's the law, she said, pretending she was completely innocent. We're just responsible homeowners. We have to protect our property values. Then she stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. You know, she whispered, your grandfather was just as stubborn. He refused every offer we made him, she said, and look how he ended up, dead in his bed, alone, surrounded by all this worthless dirt. I'm giving you a chance he never had. Take the buyout. Walk away or lose everything. Hearing her mention my grandfather hit me like a blow. She saw it too, and her smile grew wider. 24 hours, Damien, she said loudly as she stepped back. For the good of the community. She turned and glided back to her SUV, leaving Peters scrambling after her. I watched them drive away, a trail of dust settling over the official notice. I looked at the paper, then at the barn, then back again. She'd made this personal. She dragged my dead grandfather into her petty power play. She thought I was just some dumb rancher who'd fold the moment someone leaned on him. She had no idea who she'd just picked a fight with. She'd poked the bear. Now the bear was going to start engineering. After Karen and her pet inspector drove off, I stood there for a long time, staring at that paper clipped to my fence. 24 hours. The clock was already ticking. It felt like a personal insult. A violation. This land wasn't just property to me. It was my family's living history. Every fence post my grandpa hammered in, every field he plowed, every stone in the barn's foundation was a line in our story. And Karen, Lewan wanted to bulldoze the whole book because she didn't like the cover. The shock drained away fast, replaced by a slow, steady burn deep in my gut. This wasn't just a notice. It was a threat. And I don't take kindly to threats, especially not on my own land. But anger wasn't going to save my ranch. I had less than a day before bulldozers could legally roll onto my property. I unclipped the paper and sprinted back to the house. The screen door slammed behind me. I didn't have time to brood. I had to act. I grabbed my phone and called my best buddy, Dave. He wasn't a lawyer. He was a mechanic with a garage in town. But he had a PhD in common sense and knew everyone in the county. Dave, I need you to find me the best lawyer in the county. Right now. Someone who doesn't scare easy. Whoa, slow down. What happened? Karen Lewin just gave me 24 hours to tear down my entire ranch, or she'll do it herself, and bill me into bankruptcy. There was a long pause. Add vehicular manslaughter to their list of achievements. Dave went quiet for a moment. That's either gutsy or downright stupid, he said at last. Probably a bit of both. You want backup? I want you to keep your phone on in case I end up needing bail. He let out a strained laugh, more nerves than humor. All right, man. Go knock some sense into them. By the time dawn rolled in, I was already parked at the end of my driveway. It was barely 5 a.m. I had a thermos of coffee in one hand and my phone in the other, waiting for whatever storm was coming. Margaret told me the judge would hear her injunction request at 10 a.m. That meant I had to stall for 5 hours. 5 hours to keep my family's land standing. Sleep hadn't even been an option. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw bulldozers plowing straight through my barn, through my grandfather's legacy, through every memory tied to this place. At 6:15, the ambush arrived. Down the county road came a parade of heavy machinery, rolling toward me like they owned the place. 2 bulldozers, steel tracks clanking. A backhoe with its arm curled in tight like it was itching for trouble. A flatbed stacked with demolition gear big enough to level half the county. And leading the whole circus was Karen's spotless white SUV, shining like a smug little parade float in the morning light. My pulse kicked up, but I stayed put, kept my face calm, steady. If she wanted a showdown, she was about to get one. The convoy pulled up to my gate, drowning the air in diesel fumes. Karen climbed out first, wearing a hard hat that looked like a prop on top of her perfectly styled hair. With her were a foreman in a bright safety vest and 2 guys who looked like hired demolition muscle. She was glowing like she'd just won something. Good morning, Damien, she said in a voice so sweet it almost stung. We're here to take care of your compliance problem. Please move out of the way. I stayed exactly where I was. There's an injunction hearing in 4 hours, I told her. You're not touching a single board on this property. Karen laughed, short, sharp, and mean. An injunction, really? You think a court form is going to protect you? She threw a hand toward the machines behind her. Your 24 hours are up. We're well within our rights to begin. Then she stepped closer, her expression turning icy. I warned you what would happen if you fought us. Your grandfather refused to work with us, too. And look how that ended for him. Now you get to learn the same lesson. She straightened, turned her back to me, and pointed toward the barn. Start the teardown, she told the foreman. The barn goes first. The foreman, an older man whose face looked like it had been carved from sun and dust, paused for a moment, clearly unsure. The foreman, probably mid-50s and looking like he regretted ever getting out of bed that morning, hesitated. Ma'am, I don't know about this. He said there's a hearing. Karen snapped before he even finished. There's no injunction yet. Get moving. Unless you'd like me to replace you with someone who isn't scared of one man standing in a driveway. The bulldozer roared to life behind her, spitting out black smoke. Its engine growled as it rolled forward, metal tracks grinding over the gravel toward my gate. I stepped up and planted myself directly in front of it. The ground vibrated under me. Heat and diesel fumes hit my face, and the operator looked down from the cab, clearly unsure. Stop! I yelled over the engine. If you bring that machine onto my land without a court order, every one of you will be charged with trespassing. I pointed straight at the operator. I'll sue you. Then at the foreman. And you. And finally at Karen. And especially you. Destruction of property. Emotional damages. Whatever else my lawyer decides to throw at you. Your names will be on every page. Your homes, your savings, everything. The bulldozer froze where it was, engine still rumbling but no longer advancing. The foreman stepped forward. "Ma'am, he's got a point. If there's any question about the legality—" "There is no question," Karen snapped, though her calm was starting to crack. "I have the paperwork." The county approved everything. "Actually," I said, holding up my phone with a hand that only looked steady thanks to sheer willpower. "My lawyer just texted me. A judge issued a temporary restraining order 15 minutes ago. Emergency filing." I was bluffing. My phone was just showing my lock screen, but I kept my expression completely serious. "You want to challenge it?" I went on. "Go ahead. Drive that bulldozer right through me. But I've got the sheriff on speed dial. And contempt of court is a criminal offense, meaning jail time." The foreman backed away. The bulldozer operator cut the engine. One of the contractors was already heading for his truck. Karen's face cycled through several shades, red, then purple, then a sickly pale white. A vein in her forehead throbbed. For a full minute, no one said anything. Then Karen's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her expression soured. "We'll be back," she hissed. "This isn't over." "No," I said as she climbed angrily into her SUV. "It's just beginning." As the convoy rolled away down the road, I finally let myself breathe. I heard the stories from Dave, who heard them at the diner, who heard them from pretty much everyone in town. Karen had a history of doing this. Old Mrs. Patterson, a widow living 3 streets into the subdivision, was fined $500 because the beige on her shutters wasn't the exact approved shade. A young couple, brand new homeowners, was threatened with a lawsuit because their grass grew a 1/4 inch too long while they were on their honeymoon. A disabled veteran named Rodriguez was told he couldn't install a wheelchair ramp in front of his own house because it didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. Karen Lewin didn't just crave power. She wanted people to feel powerless under her. She wanted them to wake up every day knowing she controlled what they could and couldn't do, and if anyone resisted, she crushed them. She built her reputation by bullying people who didn't have the ability to fight back. But now she'd chosen the wrong target. She'd picked someone who could fight. One Saturday afternoon, I was out repairing a fence when I saw them, 2 of Karen's volunteers. One was a skinny guy named Todd, who liked to pretend he was Karen's right-hand man. The other was... The big guy stepped forward, puffing out his chest. He was at least 6 inches taller than me and 50 pounds. Heavier, every bit of it muscle. But size wasn't going to intimidate me on my own land. I didn't back up. I didn't even blink. "You need to leave," I said, calm but firm. Todd snorted. "Or what? You gonna drag us out?" "No," I said. "I'm going to call the sheriff and have you arrested. Trespassing is still a crime in this county, even for Karen's little helpers." Todd's smirk faltered just a bit, but the big guy still looked ready to swing. I raised my phone. "Last warning. Off my property, now." For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the wind rattling the fence behind us. Then Todd tapped the big guy's arm. "Come on," he muttered. "We got what we need." They backed up toward the fence line, still snapping a few last pictures before climbing back over. As they walked away, Todd called out, "You're only making this harder on yourself, Damien. Karen always wins." I watched them get into their truck and speed off, dust swirling behind them. I wasn't scared. I was done being pushed around. And Karen's people had just made their biggest mistake yet. They crossed onto my land. Now it was my turn to make a move. The guy was huge, nothing but muscle stacked on muscle. He stepped right into my space and growled, "You don't look that tough." His breath reeked of bargain bin, energy drinks, and bad choices. "Karen said you'd crumble like a lawn chair," he added. Looks like she was right. That was it, the moment my patience snapped. I shoved him square in the chest. I said, "Get off my land." He staggered back, more surprised than hurt. Then his expression twisted into anger. He clenched his fists. "You just screwed up, buddy." He lunged at me. His punch was wild and slow. I stepped aside and drove my elbow into his ribs. He tried again. I grabbed his arm, twisted it, and used his own weight to slam him face first into the dirt. Ranch work teaches you how to handle things far bigger and meaner than some pumped-up gym bro. He hit the ground hard and stayed there, wheezing. Todd froze, his camera dangling from his hand, eyes wide like he'd just seen a ghost. "You want to try your luck too?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just spun around and sprinted, back toward the road like someone had lit a fire under him. I looked down at the big guy groaning in the dirt. "Get off my land," I said. "And tell Karen this was her last warning. Oh, and tell Karen that if she sends anyone else, they'll be leaving in an ambulance." The big guy didn't argue. He got up slowly, holding his ribs, and walked away without saying anything. About 10 minutes later, Sheriff Mark Dugan pulled into my driveway. He stepped out of his cruiser with a look that told me he already knew what the call was about. "Damien," he said, closing his door, "I got a report that you assaulted 2 men. They were trespassing," I said. "One of them tried to hit me first. I defended myself." Mark let out a long sigh. "I figured. Todd has already changed his story twice, and the other guy isn't pressing. Charges, probably 2. Embarrassed he lost the fight." He gave me a steady look. "But listen, Damien, you need to be careful. These people want you to react. They want something they can use against you in court. Don't give them that." "What do you expect me to do, Mark? Just let them do whatever they want?" "No," he said. "I expect you to use your head. Fight them legally, not physically. Because I'm telling you, Karen Lewin is serious about this, and this situation is only going to escalate." He paused, then added quietly, "And for what it's worth, watch yourself. Karen doesn't fight fair." He was right. The fight today was exactly the kind of thing they were hoping for, and it was only the beginning. That fight was exactly what they were hoping for. I had let my temper slip, and I knew it. As I watched the sheriff drive away, a cold feeling settled in my stomach. Karen's next move was going to be worse. I had a bad feeling I already knew what she would target. For days, Sheriff Dugan's warning stayed in my mind. "Watch your back. She doesn't fight fair." He was right. Since she couldn't use lawyers or bulldozers yet, she tried something else, something personal. She went after my horses in the middle of the night. I have 3 horses. Apollo, a calm palomino my grandpa bought me for my 16th birthday. Scout, a quick and stubborn little mare. Belle, an older rescue who mostly naps in the sun. They are not just animals to me. They are family. And somehow Karen knew that. It happened on a Tuesday night. Everything was quiet. I fell asleep around 10. What woke me was a sudden sound, a loud, panicked whinny, followed by... Up ahead I could hear them, snorting, wheeling, hooves striking gravel. They were close. Too close. I burst through the last line of brush just in time to see Apollo's pale coat flash in the moonlight as he galloped toward the road. Scout was right behind him. And Old Belle was struggling to keep up, calling out in frightened, desperate whinnies. And then, headlights. A pair of them coming fast around the bend. My heart stopped. I waved my arms and screamed at the top of my lungs, trying to get the driver's attention, praying they'd see the horses in time. The car braked hard, tires screeching, rubber burning on asphalt. Apollo skidded sideways, barely avoiding the front bumper. Scout darted past the car entirely, disappearing into the darkness. Belle froze like a statue, trembling. The driver, a teenager, wide-eyed and shaking, stumbled out of the car. "Oh my God, sir, I almost hit... What happened?" "They came out of nowhere." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too badly as I grabbed Belle's halter and whispered to her until she stopped trembling. Someone had done this. Someone had opened my gate, cut my fence, and sent my horses straight into the path of a speeding car. And I knew exactly who would stoop that low. Karen didn't fight fair. Sheriff Dugan had warned me. I should have listened. Crashing through the underbrush, I could hear the horses ahead of me, panicked, running blindly. Then another sound cut through the night. The high-pitched whine of tires on pavement. Headlights swept across the darkness, heading straight toward the spot where the fence had been cut. A semi-truck, probably on a late-night haul, was coming around the bend fast. "No!" I yelled, pushing myself harder. I burst out of the trees just in time to see Apollo, terrified, eyes wild, bolt out onto the road directly into the path of the truck. The truck's horn blared. The driver slammed the brakes, rubber screaming against asphalt. The smell of burning tires thickened the air. Time seemed to slow. The massive grille of the truck, Apollo frozen in the headlights, the driver's horrified expression. Then Scout, my clever, fearless little mare, did something incredible. She charged up behind Apollo and body-checked him hard, knocking him off balance and shoving him off the road just as the semi skidded past, missing him by inches. The truck fishtailed, the trailer swinging wildly before the whole rig screeched. To a stop about 100 yards. Down the highway, I stood there breathless, heart hammering. Apollo trembled beside me, his coat drenched with sweat. Scout stood beside Apollo, gently nudging him with her nose. Belle had stopped just short of the road, standing under a tree and looking completely bewildered. The truck driver climbed down from his cab, his face pale. "What in the Sam Hill was that? Your horse nearly became a hood ornament." "I know. I'm sorry," I managed, still gasping as I ran my hands over Apollo's coat, checking for any injuries. He was shaken, but okay. Relief washed over me so hard it made my knees go weak. I grabbed his mane and pressed my face into his neck, grateful beyond words that he was alive. After the driver left, I spent nearly an hour calming the horses and repairing the fence. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I finally paused to breathe, I stared at those clean, precise cuts in the wire. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't vandalism. This was attempted murder, maybe not of me, but of my animals, and of anyone who might have been driving on that road. Karen Lewin had crossed a line she couldn't ever come back from. Then something caught my eye. In the mud near the fence was a footprint, deep, clear, and distinctive. And about 10 feet away, snagged on a piece of barbed wire, was a scrap of fabric, blue. The same blue as the uniform shirts the HOA patrol wore. I immediately pulled out my phone and photographed everything. Every angle, every detail. Karen wanted to play dirty? Fine. But now she'd left evidence, and I was about to get very, very serious. I'd always been good at collecting evidence, but the incident with the horses, that changed everything. This wasn't about a barn anymore. It wasn't even about HOA rules. This was about survival. My anger didn't burn hot now. It had cooled into something far more dangerous. Slow, methodical, controlled rage. Karen thought her power came from the HOA rule book. I suspected her real power and her biggest weakness was buried somewhere deeper. The next morning, I drove to the Blackwood County Records office. The place was a drab, dusty building that always smelled like old paper and weak coffee. But to me, it was a gold mine. Inside those walls was every property line. Deed, easement, covenant, and survey going back 100 years. I spent hours in the basement flipping through massive plat books. George, the clerk, watched me with mild curiosity as I requested. Original records for the entire area dating back to the 1950s. I traced the history of the land parcel by parcel as it was sold, subdivided, and stitched into the neighborhood that Karen now ruled like a petty dictator. Then I found it. A handwritten note in the margin of a 1978 survey referencing a master ground lease for a large commercial parcel, the land that would eventually become the subdivision. A ground lease. That got my full attention. A ground lease means you own the building, but you don't own the land under it. Someone else does. I need the file for Master Ground Lease 78B Parcel 4, I told George. He blinked, surprised, then headed off to find it. George came back with a thin, dusty folder. The papers inside were typed on an old manual typewriter, but the language was perfectly clear. Back in 1978, the O'Malley family had sold most of their land to developers. But one important 5-acre parcel, the heart of what would become the subdivision, they hadn't sold. They had leased it for 50 years, and that lease was about to expire. On that leased land, the developers had built everything. The clubhouse, the tennis courts, the pool, the HOA's main office, even a block of rental townhomes. Blackwood Creek Estates HOA didn't actually own the ground their headquarters stood on. They were tenants. And the best part? The lease included a clause stating that once it expired, the terms could be renegotiated at current market value, or the lease could be terminated completely. And if it was terminated, ownership of all structures on that land would revert to the leaseholder. That was it. That was the weapon. If I could take control of that lease, I'd become the landlord of the HOA itself. I would literally own the ground beneath their feet. Finding the O'Malley heirs was surprisingly easy. A few online searches gave me everything I needed. 2 sisters in Florida, a brother in Arizona. The original landowners had died years ago, and the lease was nothing more than a forgotten little investment to the family now. I spent an entire evening on the phone. I explained my situation honestly, a powerful HOA trying to force my family off our land. Something about that struck a nerve with the O'Malley siblings. After discussing it among themselves, they agreed to sell me the lease rights. There was just one problem: the price. Even though it was a bargain for what it represented, it was still far more money than I had, way more. So I liquidated everything I could. I cashed out my stocks. I sold equipment: the baler, the cattle trailer, the post hole digger. The hardest was my grandpa's John Deere tractor, the 68 4020 he bought brand new. Parting with it felt like cutting off a limb. A neighboring rancher, Henderson, bought it and promised he'd sell it back to me for the same price if I ever got back on my feet. Even after all that, I was still short. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my head in my hands when my phone rang. "Is this Damien Wright?" "My name is Trevor Hale. Mr. Henderson suggested I give you a call." I knew the name. Everyone did. Trevor Hale was a local legend and a tech millionaire who had retired in Blackwood County and mostly kept to himself. People called him eccentric, maybe even a little odd. "I understand," he continued, "that you're trying to acquire a certain ground lease and you've run into a capital shortfall. I'd like to propose a partnership." We met the next day at a few days later, I got a call from the eldest Allie sister. Her voice was shaky. "Mr. Wright, we got a very strange visit today." My stomach tightened. "From who?" "A woman named Karen Lewin." "Of course." "She said she was from the local homeowners association," the sister continued, "and that you were mentally unstable, violent, and under investigation. She claimed you were trying to commit fraud against us and that we should refuse to sell until she could protect our interests." I felt a wave of cold, controlled fury settle in my chest. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "That we don't conduct business with strangers who show up unannounced and start shouting," she said, "and that our deal with you stands." But she threatened us. She said we didn't understand how things worked in Blackwood County. That sounded exactly like Karen. "I'm so sorry she bothered you," I said. "If she contacts you again, tell her all communication must go through your attorney." "Oh, we already did," she replied. "But we wanted you to know." Something about her felt dangerous. Dangerous! She had no idea. After I hung up, I sat at my dining table staring at the wall for a long, quiet minute. Karen had somehow gotten wind of the deal. That meant someone at the county records office, or someone watching me, and had tipped her off. It didn't matter. She was already too late. The closing was scheduled for Friday morning. On Thursday afternoon, the wires cleared. Blackwood Land Holdings, LLC officially became the owner of the each-acre master ground, lease beneath every structure the HOA depended on. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from fear. From anticipation. Everything Karen had built, every ounce of power she wielded, was sitting on land she no longer had any right to, and she had no idea what was coming. I got another call today. "A very aggressive woman just contacted us," the Ali sister said. "She claimed to be a lawyer for the Blackwood Creek Estates HOA. My stomach dropped. "What did she want?" I asked. "She said she was aware we were selling the ground lease. Then she told us it would be a violation of the original agreement, which our lawyer says is absolutely false, and that the HOA was prepared to offer us more money than you did. A lot more." Karen knew. I didn't know how she found out, but she had. And now it was a race. She said they're wiring the funds tomorrow morning, the sister continued. She told us to accept the offer or face a lawsuit. I forced my voice to stay calm even though adrenaline was hammering through my veins. Hold firm, I said. Do not talk to her again. Let your lawyer handle all communication. We're closing our deal tomorrow morning. We'll beat her to it. As soon as the call ended, I dialed Trevor. He picked up on the first ring. When I explained what happened, his voice turned to steel. She's trying to preempt the sale, he said. Classic corporate rating. If her wire arrives first, her lawyers will bury the whole thing in litigation for years. We can't let that happen. My transfer is scheduled for 9, I said. Not good enough, Trevor snapped. I'm calling my banker tonight. Everything will be pre-approved. Be at the bank the moment the doors open. Every second counts. I didn't sleep that night. By 4 a.m., I was already dressed, pacing my kitchen like a caged animal, waiting for the sun to come up so I could make the move that would change everything. I stopped pretending I could sleep. I made coffee. I paced. I checked my phone 100 times, even though nothing new would appear. By 8:15 a.m., I was standing outside the bank like someone waiting for a Black Friday sale, when Susan, the branch manager, unlocked the doors at 8:30. She gave me a puzzled look, but I slipped inside before she could even say good morning. Damien, is everything all right? She asked. I need to authorize a wire transfer immediately, I said. Blackwood Land Holdings. She sat down and started typing. Mr. Hale's office called earlier. Everything is pre-approved. I just need your signature. I signed so fast the scrawl barely resembled my name. When does it go through? I asked. She hit a few keys. Processing. Processing. Done. She turned the screen toward me. Time-stamped 8:33 a.m. I had to grip the counter to keep my knees from buckling. I walked outside on shaky legs and called the Ollie sister. Did it arrive? 5 minutes ago, she said. And Mr. Wright, not even 2 minutes after your wire came through, we received another one, much larger, sent by the HOA's lawyers. 2 minutes. That's how close we were to losing everything. We're rejecting their transfer, she continued. Our lawyer is preparing a statement informing Ms. Lewin that the asset was already sold to you. I leaned against my truck, feeling everything inside me finally begin to shift. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. I could practically see Karen's face when she got the news, the confusion, the disbelief, and then that slow, dawning horror as she realized the ranch kid had just outmaneuvered her. She wasn't the hunter anymore. She was the prey. The game had changed. I was now the HOA's landlord and rent was about to come due. Owning the ground lease felt like holding a royal flush in a poker game where everyone else still thought I'd been bluffing. For a week I did nothing. I let Karen and the HOA board stew in their own uncertainty. While they scrambled, Dave and I were in my workshop having the time of our lives. Bigger, I said, pointing at my computer screen. The letters need to be bigger, angrier, blood red. Dave grinned, sanding the edge of a 4x8 sheet of plywood. You want it to scream, you are so screwed, but, professionally. Exactly. Think foreclosure notice meets highway billboard. What about a picture? He asked. Maybe a nice photo of Karen looking constipated. Tempting, I said, but no. Let's keep it classy. Just the words. The words are enough. Rent increased 10x, Dave read from the screen. That's beautiful. That's poetry. Shakespeare couldn't have written it better. Shakespeare never had to deal with an HOA, Dave muttered. True, I said. He just had plagues and monarchs. Way easier. We were building a sign, a massive 4x8-foot slab painted in almost blinding white. Our masterpiece. Our declaration of war. A few nights later, under cover of darkness, we planted it right at the grand entrance of the Blackwood Creek Estates rental. Townhomes, the complex sitting squarely on my newly acquired land. I was the landowner now. I could put up whatever sign I damn well pleased. And just for fun, we'd had my lawyer draft some very official-looking notice to vacate letters. Not legally binding eviction notices, but close enough to spark a full-blown panic. We slipped one under every door in the complex. The next morning, I parked on the public road with a perfect view of the entrance. I waited with a thermos of coffee and a bag of pastries Dave insisted I bring. "You're gonna want snacks for this show," he'd said. He wasn't wrong. I settled back, adjusted Grandpa's old cowboy hat, crossed my arms, and waited. It didn't take long. The first commuter, a guy in a BMW, slowed as he approached the exit. Then he slammed on his brakes so hard I heard the tires screech from where I sat. Across the street, I watched the show unfold. The BMW guy stared at the sign for a solid 30 seconds, reading it, rereading it, before getting out to take a picture. Then his wife burst out of their townhome in a bathrobe, waving one of our notice to vacate letters and shouting something I couldn't quite make out. But I was pretty sure it included several words you don't say in church. Within 20 minutes, the entrance had turned into a full-blown circus. People spilled out of their homes wearing pajamas, bathrobes, half-buttoned business suits, yoga pants, slippers, some combination of all of the above. They gathered in noisy clusters, pointing at the sign, flapping the eviction notices, yelling into phones like they were trying to call God directly. A woman in a silk robe was openly crying while clutching her letter. A man in a three-piece suit was red-faced, pacing, screaming into his phone about lawyers and constitutional rights. Some guy was filming a video for social media while his wife had what looked like a complete nervous meltdown behind him. It was beautiful. It was chaos. It was exactly what I had planned. And towering over them all, painted in massive blood-red letters, the sign declared, "Attention tenants. This property is under new ownership. All leases are currently under review. Rent increase 10x effective immediately. All payments to be made to Blackwood Land Holdings, LLC." It was legal theater, of course, nothing more. I couldn't actually change existing leases overnight. And those eviction notices? They weren't worth the paper they were printed on. But the tenants didn't know that. And the whole point was simple. Create chaos. Turn the HOA's own residents against them. Make Karen feel the fire. Around 8:30, Karen's white SUV came screeching, around the corner so fast she nearly took out a mailbox. She didn't even bother parking properly. Just stopped sideways in the street and practically fell out of the driver's seat. One of the residents immediately ran up to her, shoving a notice to vacate in her face. "What is this?" "What did you do?" he yelled. Karen pushed him aside like he was a garden gnome and stormed toward the sign. And then her face. It went through 4 distinct stages, each one more satisfying than the last. 1. Disbelief, like the sign might vanish if she blinked. 2. Confusion, realizing the HOA didn't authorize any of this. 3. Horror, understanding someone beat her. Or pure, unfiltered rage, the real Karen emerging, stripped of her fake smile and HOA politeness. It was a masterpiece. I almost wished I'd brought popcorn. Then she saw me across the street, leaning against my truck, coffee in hand, Grandpa's hat tipped, low, watching the entire spectacle, like it was the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And that's when the fun really started. You of all people should appreciate a well-worded notice. Karen's jaw clenched so hard I could hear her teeth grind. A few residents were still gathered behind her, watching, whispering, clutching their letters like ticking bombs. She glanced back at them, then stepped closer to me, too close, trying to loom. But it only made her look desperate. "You think this is funny?" she hissed. "I think it's informative," I said. Her eyes dropped to the thick folder tucked under my arm, the clipboard in my hand. The cowboy hat, the calm confidence. I looked exactly like what I now was. The landowner. The one person she absolutely did not want in charge. "What did you do?" she demanded. "What did you buy?" "Oh," I said lightly, "just the ground under your feet." She blinked, once, twice. A tiny tick twitched at the corner of her eye. "That's impossible." "Check with the Ali family," I said, shrugging. Lovely people. Very reasonable. Unlike some folks around here. One of the residents stepped forward, waving his notice. "Is it true? Are our rents going up 10 times?" "You can't do that!" Karen spun on him, snapping, "He can't do anything. He's bluffing." I raised my clipboard. "Oh, this? Just documenting the structures that will revert to me when the lease expires. You know, the clubhouse, the pool, the tennis courts, your HOA offices, all that fun stuff." A ripple of panic went through the residence. Karen's face went purple. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Wright." "And you," I said, tipping my hat again. "Should have been nicer to your neighbors." Her fist clenched like she wanted to hit me, but with half the community watching, she forced a brittle smile instead. "This isn't over," she spat. "Oh, I certainly hope not," I grinned. "I'm just getting started." I let the words hang in the air, heavy as an executioner's axe. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped their coffee. Karen looked like she'd just swallowed a wasp. "You can't do this," the man in the business suit stammered. "This has to be illegal." "Illegal?" I said, flipping casually through my folder. "No. Ill-advised, stressful, and extremely unpleasant? Absolutely. But illegal? Not at all." The man's wife stepped forward, her hands shaking as she held up her notice. "Are we really being evicted?" "No," I said calmly. "Not today. Not tomorrow. And certainly not because of those papers you found under your door." I gave Karen a pointed glance. "Those are perfectly legal notices to vacate. Not eviction notices." Important distinction. Several people turned to stare at Karen. Her expression shifted from furious to cornered. A woman in yoga pants raised her voice. "So the HOA lied?" More murmurs. Eyes narrowing. Phones recording. Karen stepped forward, her fingers stabbing the air at me. "You're manipulating them. You're terrorizing our residents." I raised an eyebrow. "Our residents? Oh, that's adorable." "No, Karen, they're my tenants now. That's how property ownership works." Someone in the crowd laughed. Nervously, but it counted. Karen's composure snapped like a cheap lawn chair. "You won't get away with this. I'll have you arrested." "For what?" I spread my hands. "Posting signs on my land? Communicating with my tenants? Drinking coffee in public?" I lifted my mug. "Go ahead. Call the sheriff." I paused, then pulled out my phone. "Actually, I'll do it for you. Mark and I go way back. He'd love to hear about how the HOA tried to buy up land it doesn't own." Karen sputtered, an actual sputter, like a lawnmower that refuses to start. A few residents snorted laughter. The man in the business suit turned on her now. "You told us not to worry. You told us everything was fine. You said the HOA had it handled." "It was handled!" Karen shouted. This child blindsided us." I smiled. "Oh, thanks, Karen. I'll take that as a compliment." Her eyes flashed with the kind of rage you only see in wild animals cornered in traps of their own making. "This isn't over," she hissed. I tipped my hat. "I know. That's the best part." I let that sink in. The notices are real. The rent increase is real. And I strongly suggest, I said, projecting my voice so the whole crowd could hear, that you all start asking your HOA president how she let this happen. Karen snatched the papers from the man's hands, her eyes darting over the letterhead. Blackwood Land Holdings, LLC. The exact second she understood. What that meant flickered across her face, like a light bulb exploding. She realized I owned the ground under every building, every office, every inch of territory she believed she ruled. This is... She stammered, completely derailed, words slipping through her fingers like wet soap. "Unfair?" I offered helpfully. "Outrageous? Unprecedented? You can pick any adjective you want. I've got time." "It's very unfair," she finally shrieked. And there it was. The moment. The perfect, beautiful moment. The woman who had tried to bulldoze my family legacy with phony rules. Who had cut my fence and nearly killed my horses. Who had strutted around terrorizing the entire subdivision with her petty dictatorship, was now surrounded by furious residents waving notices and questioning her leadership, whining that I was being unfair. I let a slow, satisfied smile curl across my lips, the kind of smile a wolf gives a sheep right before dinner. "Unfair, Karen?" I said softly. I'm just getting started. Just a simple rancher. I tipped my hat again. A simple businessman. I made a significant investment and now I'm looking for a return. Nothing personal? I spread my hands in mock innocence. It's just business. Isn't that what you always say when you fine widows for the wrong shade of beige? When you deny wheelchair ramps to disabled veterans? It's just business, right? Her face went from furious red to chalk white in an instant. For a moment, I honestly thought she might faint. You will be hearing from our lawyers, she hissed. I certainly hope so, I said. I have a few things to discuss with them. The HOA office building, the clubhouse, the pool, those all sit on my land too. Their leases are under review. Similar adjustments may be appropriate. I paused just long enough to let her feel the drop. Unless, I added casually, the board would prefer to negotiate. I'm a reasonable man, unlike some people. The crowd around us had thickened. More residents were spilling out of their homes, some in suits, some in slippers, some half asleep, and not one of them looked happy. They were angry, loud, confused, and they were starting to realize the villain of the moment wasn't me. You're a monster, Karen whispered. No, Karen, I said. My smile faded. My voice dropped cold and flat as a coffin lid. I'm a consequence. You started this war, I said. You fired the first shot. You tried to destroy my family's legacy because you thought you could. You thought I was just some dumb rancher who'd roll over. I leaned in, close enough that only she could hear me. You were wrong, and now you're going to pay for it. Every single day for the rest of your miserable life. I straightened up, tipped my hat one last time, and walked back toward my truck. Behind me, the crowd closed in on Karen like sharks scenting blood in the water. This is all your fault, Karen. You did this to us. We trusted you. I didn't look back. I climbed into my truck, turned the key, and drove away with a smile on my face and a song in my heart. And the best part? This was only the opening move. The giant sign sent the entire community into full-blown panic. Within days, my lawyer called, voice practically humming with satisfaction. The HOA's attorney was requesting an emergency meeting. They were ready to negotiate. The board session was scheduled in the community clubhouse, a building that now sat on my land. I arrived a few minutes late on purpose. The room fell silent the second I walked in. 7 board members sat stiffly at a long conference table. Karen sat at the head, looking like she hadn't slept in a week. The others looked just as rattled. I didn't take a seat. I wanted them to feel the imbalance, the shift in power, the fact that the person they had tried to crush was now the man who could evict their entire organization with a signature. I walked to the front of the room, boots echoing across the polished floor. The board members stiffened as I approached, their eyes tracking me like prey watching a predator. I didn't sit. I wanted them to feel every second of this. Good evening, I said, tipping my hat just enough to mock courtesy. I'm Damian Wright, managing partner of Blackwood Land Holdings. I'll see your new landlord. Arthur, the treasurer, was the first to find his voice. He cleared his throat, papers trembling in his hands. Mr. Wright, we're here to discuss your predatory rental demands. You cannot increase rents by 1,000%. I let a slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't friendly. You're right. I can't do that on existing residential leases. Relief washed over them. Shoulders relaxed. A few even exhaled. I let them enjoy the illusion for exactly 3 seconds. That, I continued, was simply an attention getter. My version of an emergency notice. Their relief froze. However, I said, sliding a thick stack of documents toward them, the master lease for the commercial properties is an entirely different matter. According to the 1978 agreement, once ownership transfers, rates must be renegotiated at current market value. Karen's face drained of color. She already knew where this was going. For decades, I said, tapping the old lease. You've been paying $12,000 a year. I tapped the new lease. The updated rate will be $120,000 per month. The room exploded. Insane. Extortion. We'll never pay that. I raised one hand and the noise died instantly. That totals about 1.4 million a year, I said calmly. Add in the townhome income I'll collect when those leases expire, and your annual budget will be short by roughly $2 million. The board members stared at me like a man announcing their funeral schedule. And all of this, I paused, letting them feel the weight of it, is the price your president forced onto you. I turned my eyes to Karen. She couldn't look away. Not anymore. For a long moment, the room was silent, heavy, tense, suffocating. Then Karen finally spoke, her voice low and shaking with anger. What do you want, Wright? I clasped my hands behind my back and spoke slowly, letting each word sink in. A legally binding covenant, I said. 3 conditions. I raised one finger. 1, my ranch is permanently exempt from every HOA rule forever. A second finger. 2, the HOA pays for the full restoration of my barn, every last cent. Then a third. 3, your president, I nodded toward E. Karen reads a public apology at a community meeting. Written by me. She admits to everything, the fake reports, the harassment, the sabotage. Karen's face twisted with rage. She was practically vibrating. Absolutely not, she snapped. I will not be humiliated. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a lethal calm. Would you rather the HOA collapse? Would you rather every homeowner receive a $40,000 special assessment? Because that's where this is headed. Her jaw clenched. I leaned in just enough for her to feel the heat of the words. Those are your options, door A or door B. There is no door C. I placed the covenant on the table with a soft thud. 72 hours, I said. After that, the offer expires and the new lease terms begin. Then I turned and walked out, not bothering to look back. The tension behind me felt like a storm about to break. And break it did. Faced with choosing between financial ruin and throwing their own president under the bus, the board made the only choice they could. They voted 6-1 to accept my terms. Karen was the lone dissenting vote. Her vendetta had cost her everything, and this was only the beginning. Karen was the lone holdout, overruled by her own people. The covenant protecting my ranch was signed and notarized before she even had time to finish protesting. A check for the full barn restoration was on its way. All that remained was the apology. The community meeting was held in the local high school auditorium. Every homeowner who could squeeze into a seat was there, angry, confused, whispering, hunting for someone to blame. The tension felt like static in the air. I sat in the second row beside Dave. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to finish what she started. The board handled the boring procedural stuff first. Then the treasurer stepped forward. As many of you know, he began, we recently encountered a significant challenge related to historical land lease agreements. After negotiation, we've reached a settlement. However, one condition remains. Our president, Karen Lewin, must deliver a formal statement. A wave of whispers rippled across the auditorium. Karen walked to the podium. I had never seen her look so small. The queen of the HOA, now stripped of authority, stripped of certainty, stripped of her throne. Her hands visibly shook as she unfolded the page. My page, the apology I had written word for word. She swallowed, raised her eyes to the microphone, and began. I am here tonight to issue a formal apology, she said, her voice stiff and hollow. I, Karen Lewin, in my capacity as president, engaged in a targeted campaign of harassment against my neighbor, Mr. Damian Wright. A collective murmur swept through the crowd, shock, disbelief, vindication. I abused my office, she continued, forcing the words out. I filed false reports. I issued baseless violations. I authorized unauthorized entry onto Mr. Wright's property, resulting in damage, endangerment of livestock, and emotional distress. The audience reacted, gasps, mutters. Someone in the back whisper yelled, I knew it! But Karen wasn't done. I acted with personal bias, not community interest. My actions were inappropriate, unethical, and harmful to both Mr. Wright and the residents of this neighborhood. Her voice cracked. She blinked rapidly, swallowing humiliation like poison. I accept full responsibility. Silence followed, heavy, sharp, painful. The kind that doesn't come from disbelief, but from truth finally landing. I sat still, expression unreadable. This was never about revenge. This was about consequences. And tonight she finally met hers, knowingly used a falsified report from a county inspector to issue an unjust demolition order against Mr. Wright's historic family barn. A loud gasp rippled through the auditorium. People who had defended her, trusted her, even admired her, now stared as if seeing her for the first time. I authorized volunteers to trespass on his property. I was involved in acts of sabotage and intimidation that endangered livestock and put motorists at risk. I blinked. That part wasn't in my draft. I glanced at Dave. He just lifted his palms as if to say, "Don't look at me." Later, I learned the board's lawyers had forced her to accept total responsibility for everything, every deed, every scheme to shield the HOA itself from lawsuits. She swallowed hard before continuing. My actions were not in the community's interest. They were born of personal vendetta and abuse of authority. They exposed every homeowner to immense legal and financial liability. Her voice cracked on the next line. I offer my deepest apologies to Mr. Damian Wright, and to all residents of Blackwood Creek Estates. For a heartbeat, the entire auditorium went silent. Then the dam burst. "You lied to us," someone yelled. "You weaponized the HOA. You used our money to attack a man's family." A woman shouted, "You endangered people's lives." Then from the back, someone started a chant. "Resign, resign, resign." Within seconds, the entire auditorium was roaring it. Karen stood frozen behind the podium, gripping the edges as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. The color had drained from her face. Her eyes darted around the room, searching desperately for support that simply wasn't there. The board members were pale and helpless, shoulders hunched, avoiding eye contact. Near the back doors, Sheriff Dugan crossed his arms and leaned against the wall, watching with an expression that said he had expected this day for a long time. Karen tried to speak into the microphone, but the crowd drowned her out. Not with chaos, but with righteous fury. The mighty HOA tyrant toppled by her own neighbors, by her own actions, by her own arrogance. And I just sat there, hands folded, watching it all play out, not gloating, not celebrating, just witnessing justice arrive. Late, but right on time. Sheriff Dugan caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod, the kind that says it's time. Then he started walking toward the stage. The chanting died instantly. Hundreds of people watched him move down the aisle, boots echoing against the linoleum floor. Karen froze behind the podium like a deer caught in headlights. When he reached her, he spoke calmly, but his voice carried through the entire auditorium. "Mrs. Lewin," he said, "I have a few questions I'd like to ask you down at the station. About some evidence we recovered from a fence line. A footprint, a piece of fabric, and a very interesting statement from a county inspector named Peters, who decided his conscience was worth more than his job." Karen's face drained to a sickly gray. You could see the exact second she realized the apology was the least of her problems. The sheriff continued, tone polite but iron solid. "You can come voluntarily, or I can make this official right here. Your choice." She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She didn't even look at her board for help. She just nodded stiffly and stepped away from the podium. The sheriff escorted her down the aisle. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, silent and merciless. Hundreds of eyes followed her, resentful, betrayed, disgusted. The same people she had bullied with fines and threats, now watching as their once mighty queen was marched out of her own kingdom. No one spoke. No one offered sympathy. Not a single person tried to stop her. I learned later what broke her. Inspector Peters had surrendered everything. Emails, texts, voice messages, screenshots, even a timeline he kept to protect himself. All of it formed a perfect map of Karen's scheme. With that evidence, the charges came quickly. Filing false official documents, conspiracy to commit vandalism, reckless endangerment for the horse incident, tampering with county records, abuse of authority under HOA statutes. It was a laundry list of stupidity and arrogance, all wrapped in legal terminology that meant one thing. Karen was done. Absolutely finished. She wasn't getting out of this with a fine or a stern warning. Her empire had collapsed, and she was standing in the rubble with no one left to blame but herself. Her husband's construction company lost 3 major county contracts the moment the news broke. The state licensing board opened an investigation before the week was over. Karen tried to fight at first. She always had a certain talent for denial, but the evidence was too solid, too damning. In the end, she pleaded no contest to avoid a public trial. The judge handed down the sentence, with the polite detachment of a man reading a weather report. 2 years probation, a hefty fine, 200 hours of community service. But the real punishment wasn't the legal one. It was everything that happened after. No one in Blackwood County would look her in the eye. Neighbors crossed the street when they saw her coming. Parents pulled their kids away like she carried something contagious. The country club revoked her membership with a single mailed letter. Her so-called friends vanished, so thoroughly you'd think they'd never known her. 3 months later, a large red and white for sale sign appeared in front of the Lewin house. It didn't stay up long. Rumor had it they moved to Arizona. I hope the HOA there is everything she deserves. The restoration crew finished the barn on a bright October morning, the kind of crisp fall day where the sunlight feels golden instead of hot. They'd done beautiful work, better than I imagined even. New timbers blended seamlessly with the old. The foundation reinforced with steel, the replacement roof built sturdy enough to last another 100 years. They'd even preserved the makers. Mark, my great-grandfather, had carved into the main beam. I stood in the doorway, hand resting on the smooth, warm wood. For a moment in the quiet, with the smell of fresh lumber and the glow of morning light, I could swear I felt my grandfather standing right beside me. Dave's truck came rumbling up the drive. He climbed out carrying 2 cold beers and passed me one. "Not bad," he said, nodding toward the barn. I laughed. "High praise coming from you." He took a long drink, then looked at the barn again, his expression softening. "You did it, you know," he said. "You saved it. You saved all of it." I didn't answer at first. I just let the moment settle around us, the barn, the land, the quiet peace that hadn't existed here for far too long. Finally, I took a slow sip of beer and nodded. "Yeah," I said. "We did." The barn stood gleaming in the afternoon light. Every beam straight, every board solid. "Not bad," Dave said, admiring it. "Not bad at all." He grinned and took another swig of his beer. "The HOA paid for every nail," he added with a laugh. "That's the best part." He tapped his bottle against mine with a little clink. "So what now? You planning to stay their landlord forever?" "Already handled," I said. "Signed a new 50-year lease last week." Dave blinked. 50 years? At what rate?" "Original," I said. 12,000 a year." He stared at me. "You let them off easy?" "Maybe." I shrugged and took a slow sip of beer. "But they'll remember. Every time they write that check, every time they drive past the entrance and see my name on that sign, they'll remember exactly what happens when you mess with a right." Dave let out a low whistle. "Yeah," he said. "They will." Just then, Sheriff Dugan's cruiser rolled up the road and pulled into my drive. He stepped out, thumbs hooked in his belt, and gave the barn an approving nod. "Heard the barn's finally done," he said. "Looks good, real good. That thing will outlast all of us." He tipped his hat back and looked out over the fields in that thoughtful way old lawmen get. "You know," he said slowly, "when I told you to beat them with the law, I didn't expect you to become their landlord, get their president arrested, and make their whole board sign a surrender document. You told me to be creative," I reminded him. He barked out a laugh. "That I did." He tipped his hat again, climbed into his cruiser, and rolled back down the drive. I finished my beer, said goodbye to Dave, and walked up the hill behind the house. The sun was lowering, casting long shadows across the pasture. Apollo, Scout, and the rest of the horses wandered lazily under the orange sky, tails flicking, peaceful and unbothered. exactly how things were always meant to be. I stood there for a long time, watching them, feeling the quiet settle in around me. For the first time in months, the ranch felt whole again, safe again, mine again. After everything Karen had tried to take from me, after everything she'd done to my family's land, I had won, and the land itself seemed to know it. Bell were grazing peacefully, safe behind the new fence. Below me, the barn stood, straight and proud against the sea of identical beige houses in the distance. My grandpa used to say, a man's character is like a fence post. Either it stands up straight in a storm, or it rots from the inside and falls over. Karen Lewin had rotted from the inside a long time ago. She just didn't know it. Not until I came along and gave her the push she'd been earning for years. I put on Grandpa's old Stetson, adjusted the brim, and took one last look at the ranch, the fields, the horses, the barn reborn from ashes, peaceful, quiet, mine. Then I turned and headed back toward the house, boots crunching in the gravel, the sun warm on my shoulders. I had a ranch to run, and for the first time in a long time, nothing and no one stood in my way.